Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. Great to have your company this Tuesday evening. Now, big news tonight out of Canberra with the retirement from politics of former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. That and all the news making headlines across the country. Here's what's coming up tonight on Credlin. The campaign to destroy our national celebrations ramped up, with one local council co-opting Anzac Day-style ceremonies for their Day of Mourning events. I'll speak with a Vietnam veteran who says using these events to run down Australia is a disgrace and it's got to stop. Australia's cricket captain Pat Cummins, the wokest bloke in a baggy green, joins the pile-on against Australia Day. But his comments haven't gone down well with fans. Plus the inquiry into how our justice system deals with sexual assault cases that could have serious ramifications, including a move away from criminal trials and a lower burden of proof. Legal expert Chris Merritt with more. And despite voting for the Stage 3 tax cuts and promising to deliver them at 2 federal elections, the PM's set to break yet another promise. First super, then your power bill, and now this. The opposition says, why should anyone now trust Labor?
They're a package of tax cuts Labor promised to stick to, and it will be a huge broken promise if Anthony Albanese walks away from those promises.
Labor told us it had a plan for the economic pressures that Australians are dealing with, but it's crystal clear that they don't have a plan.
Moving away from any aspect of the Stage 3 tax cuts would be the mother of all broken promises.
But first, the issue with those Stage 3 tax cuts, now all but certain to be changed, is not about who most deserves cost of living relief, but whether this is a government that can be trusted. Whether the Prime Minister can be trusted, given this is his call as leader and it's his character that's on the line. Now, before winning the last election, Anthony Albanese and his Treasurer Jim Chalmers reiterated some 100 times that the Stage 3 tax cuts were safe.
Labor will support all of the legislated tax cuts which are in place now. Of course, tax cuts were legislated earlier on in this term, and we've said that we won't seek to change those legislated tax cuts.
And I've said on the Stage 3 tax cuts that they've been legislated. People are entitled to operate on the basis of that certainty.
These tax cuts were supported by both sides of Parliament through 2 elections. Both the PM and the Treasurer, as opposition MPs, voted for them in the Parliament. But now the people who've had to wait the longest for what was promised to them will reportedly get less, and the people who've already had their tax cuts will get more. Now, this will please the Labor left, who've never liked these tax cuts in the first place and who don't like people with aspiration. But it'll be yet another broken promise from a Prime Minister who's starting to seem incapable of being straight with voters. He promised not to touch your superannuation.
We said we would not have any major changes in superannuation, and that is certainly our intention.
Look, we said about superannuation that we would maintain the system. Australians shouldn't expect major changes to superannuation if the government changes hands.
But of course he has. He promised to cut your power bill by $275 per household per year.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
Instead, your bill has gone up by more than 20% on his watch. The PM promised to boost real wages, but real household income has actually fallen by as much as 8%. And he promised again and again that everyone's legislated tax cuts were safe, but they're not.
I can confirm that we haven't changed our position. We have no change to our plans. Tax cuts will happen in July. We haven't changed our position. I've said we haven't changed our position. We haven't changed our position on the Stage 3 tax cuts.
We have not changed our position on Stage 3 tax cuts.
They've been legislated we support them. Our position hasn't changed.
The Prime Minister and the Treasurer even put out a joint media release saying, and I quote, "An Albanese Labor government will deliver the same legislated tax relief to more than 9 million Australians as the Morrison government." Well, not anymore, it seems. And do not believe the spin that will come from Labor that the Stage 3 tax cuts were somehow unfair. Now, if all stages had been delivered in the form that Labor had previously supported, that Labor had previously voted for, a taxpayer on $45,000 a year would have received a 17% tax cut, and someone on $200,000 a year would have received an 18% tax cut. And all of this would have been just the return of a decade and a half of bracket creep anyway. Now, make no mistake, this is a massive breach of faith. On top of all the other broken promises, it means that this Prime Minister and his government simply can't be trusted. Now, remember Peter Garrett's notorious statement to our own Steve Price back in 2007 when he said, "Once we get in, we'll just change it all." This is just more of the same from Labor. Make whatever promises you like to win the election and then just ignore them all anyway afterwards. Now, some commentators are telling you don't fuss, all governments break promises, and this promise was broken for something better, namely more cost of living relief for poorer taxpayers. But I tell you what, if we endlessly forgive politicians broken promises, we'll keep getting broken promises. If we don't punish the lack of integrity in our leaders, we'll always get a lack of integrity. Remember, the standard you walk past is for voters the standard you accept. And walking past this would mean giving politicians a licence to lie. This is a low act from a poor government. The PM no doubt thinks changing these tax cuts will help him in Dunkley, the seat he must hold after the untimely death of the incumbent Labor MP, Peter Murphy. I think he would be surprised because Dunkley has plenty of aspirational voters who may not currently earn $180,000 a year but would like to, and think that people should be incentivised to get ahead, to earn more, not be hit harder and harder and harder for making a go of things. Then there's those teal seats, the best off, most well-heeled seats in the country. These are the seats where changing the Stage 3 tax cuts are going to do the most damage, and where voting teal will no longer be punishing a disappointing Morrison government, but will help keep a bad Labor government in office. Losing his voice last year was politically disastrous for Anthony Albanese, but I think breaking this promise will actually be worse. Losing a referendum's one thing, but breaking a commitment your party has taken to 2 elections, that's a disgrace. And it reminds me very much of a similar broken promise that ended up sinking another Labor PM.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
They've been legislated. We support them. We stand by that.
There's no surprise to me that the Liberal Party head office is already out today reminding people that Labor PMs have form on broken promises. All right, let's go to Canberra for the headlines. Fair bit going on there this week. Sky News political reporter Olivia Casely.
Good evening. As part of his push to win the 2022 election, Anthony Albanese convinced Labor to support Stage 3 of the income tax cuts. That's been Labor's position ever since, albeit one some MPs were uncomfortable with, but it appears there is one last push for change. Sky News understands if there is any adjustment, it will be tinkering. Low and middle income earners are in line to receive an extra tax cut above what is already legislated. And, despite speculation, the top tax bracket is expected to increase from its current $180,000 per year. The government has maintained for some time that its position has not changed, but there was an extra caveat put on that this morning.
Our position hasn't changed, but let me say this. In all that we do, in every decision that we take, we are utterly concerned about easing the cost of living pressures on middle Australia. And in every decision we continue to take, that will remain our focus.
The money saved could go to lower income workers. Any tweak would become a major part of the Dunkley by-election on March 2. Not long after that, there'll be another by-election in the seat of Cook, triggered by Scott Morrison's departure from politics. The former Prime Minister will farewell Parliament in the first week of February. And the government has finally been able to track down the man responsible for the Medibank cyber hack. The breach was enormous in scope, with nearly 10 million customers compromised, their personal details and private health information published on the dark web.
These people are cowards and they are scumbags. They hide behind technology, and today the Australian government is saying that when we put our minds to it, we will unveil who you are and we will make sure that you are accountable.
The Russian national, Alexander Ermakov, has been slapped with special sanctions in a bid to deter cyber criminals from collaborating with him. Authorities are still focused on a number of Russian gangs threatening Australia.
Look, I spoke last night about how the Prime Minister's tried to use the summer to reset his political fortunes. Plenty of campaign-style events, but none more evident today than when he turned up on the FM radio program, the hugely popular Kyle and Jackie O.
I support tax cuts, and everyone will be getting a tax cut.
Me too. Will I get one?
You will always be looked after, Kyle, because I know that you're struggling.
Yeah.
He had all these questions too. Would he propose to his girlfriend, and on it went. But, you know, we've got these staged pictures tomorrow at that caucus meeting, that radio interview, a big speech on Thursday. It's all starting to look a bit desperate to me, his thoughts, and of course on that news today about Scott Morrison. Let's bring in Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell. Well, great to have you back for 2024. I really feel the year's now kicking off that you're back in the seat there in Canberra. Well, I think you're in Sydney tonight, but you're certainly following everything pretty closely for us, Andrew. PM's been quizzed pretty hard over the years, ever since Labor voted for those tax cuts, stage 3. We know at the time they didn't want to vote for them. They did in the end. They took them to 2 elections. 100 times is on the record saying they would not change, but change looks like it's coming.
Well, it is, but, you know, it hasn't happened yet, Peter, and what we could see is more money for lower and middle income earners and not much of a change at the top end. That would be wise politically ahead of a by-election. Anything else
where's the money come from?
Anything else well, they do have a surplus, but what I'm saying is anything else. And the suspicion is there will be tinkering at the higher end. You're right, they'll be smashed with the old broken promise accusation. And that seems a bigger risk than I would take, Peter, I have to say, if I was in the PM's chair.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. And when I've sat there in those budget meetings and you look at tax cuts, I mean, just turning the dial a little bit is tens of billions of dollars. I mean, this is the problem they've got. They might have a skinny surplus now. They won't have a surplus after the next budget. We know we're drowning in debt. We know there's a caucus meeting tomorrow, a very expensive $500,000 worth of picture opportunity there. There's also been a cabinet meeting this afternoon to tick off what all the backbenchers will be told tomorrow, which the Prime Minister's already probably got in his speech for Thursday. What can you tell us? Do we have any drum out of Canberra?
No, the only drum I have is I do expect the tax cuts to be broadened to include lower and middle income earners. And I think there'll be more, perhaps, energy bill relief and that sort of thing. I mean, I would think it's a broad gamut of things on the cost of living front. And that's what he'll be addressing at the National Press Club Thursday. You'd expect nothing less. Everyone knows that's the only issue in town. They've got a by-election they can lose at 6% and it's tight, I understand. The Liberals have a chance there. It's not going to be easy, but they have a chance. There's got to be a swing against the government given the political environment. So I think that's roughly broadly what we can expect. That's all people are going to pay attention to anyway. They might have other things to talk about, Peter, but people will only care about the cost of living measures.
Look, in the seat of Canning, the incumbent Liberal there died in office. It was a coalition government in power. Slight swing, but the government held. The same thing happened in the seat of Aston. Peter Nugent died in office 2001, if I remember rightly. Again, Howard government was in office. Yes, there was a swing against them, but they held on. You'd expect, even though I think the government's on the nose in some of these working class aspirational seats, there's no doubt about that. I think the fact that Peter Murphy was well loved and she's died in office, they're not in much trouble in Dunkley, I suspect.
I don't know, Peter. I don't know. I mean, they've had 12 interest rate rises. I think both sides are doing a bit of expectation management at the moment. That Aston by-election, by the way,
I think that was
this Aston by-election 2001. There was, I think, about a 6% margin, and Howard copped about a 4% swing. And only maybe a year earlier, it introduced a GST, or not long earlier. So, and he'd been in office a fair amount of time. So he's still got a 4% swing against him.
Well, what?
So why?
Yeah, but
why
what was
wouldn't
interesting
that
then, my husband ran that campaign. I remember it well. My husband ran that campaign. Yeah, but what was interesting there, if you remember back in 2001, there was the issue of petrol indexation. And remember, Howard came under some real pressure to drop petrol indexation. Now,
he
didn't want to do it. I think there was, there was opposition from Costello at the time, and he did. And people think the turnaround in 2001 was at the end of the year with Tampa and the 9/11 sort of election in that November, but it actually really kicked off from Aston. So, I think we'll all be looking very closely at Dunkley. And now, of course, mate, we've got a by-election in the offing with Cook. But Scott Morrison says he's going today, but he won't actually formally resign, will he, for about a month?
Yeah, and that costs the taxpayer, Peter, to be honest with you. I mean, it costs them at least $500,000 because as much as that's been made of the caucus meeting, which costs the same and it's controversial, and why couldn't you have that in 2 weeks? If Scott Morrison gave his letter to Milton Dick, the Speaker, today, and they had that by-election the same day as Dunkley, it'd cost significantly less. But he wants to stay until the end of February. Now, one of the reasons for that is a valedictory speech, fair enough. But I think that will be a question in coming days. Shouldn't he just go if he's going and save the taxpayers a bit of money in those by-elections? We've got the annoyance now of 2 by-elections probably about a month apart.
Yeah, look, I think the criticism there of Scott Morrison is fair. I mean, announcing it and waiting around for a month, he'll use all the resources of his office to clean things up and pack things up and all of that. And yes, he's a former Prime Minister and they get to go of their own choosing, but I think being mindful of the dollars is smart at this time. Hey, before Christmas, we talked about reshuffles. We know that one is due on the coalition side and one has certainly been talked about on the government side, particularly in relation to Linda Burney. All that speculation yesterday, I mean, I saw that piece in the Australia and another go at it today. We need an Indigenous Governor-General. That seems to me preparing the ground that Burney may well be announced. Of course, then she'd leave the Parliament. But do you think there is a reshuffle, given Parliament's back in a couple of weeks? If they're going to do it, they've got to do it quick.
No, I don't think so, because I think it'll be happening this week. So if he's going to announce it, he'll probably announce it this week, to be honest with you. Otherwise, I think it will wait until later in the year, and that was my previous mail. I don't have any insight into that, into whether anything's changed on that front. I would say he's probably got enough to deal with this cost of living issue package, the by-election and so forth. And significantly, if there is a reshuffle, okay, he might get a couple of poor performers out of the way. It would certainly be controversial after the Voice to make Linda Burney Governor-General. I'm not sure that's the best idea. But I think it's important to note the key roles wouldn't be changing, in my view. So Prime Minister, obviously, Treasurer would remain Jim Chalmers, Finance probably Katie Gallagher, but certainly Defence, Miles, Foreign Wong. So it's really just shuffling the decks around the edges to some extent. It will be interesting to see how Claire O'Neill goes in Home Affairs, whether he retains faith in her once he does one. There will be one this year. Don't think it'll be in the next couple of weeks, Peter.
Just quickly, do we know where Scott Morrison's heading off for a post-political career, and how do you rate the chances of the coalition holding on to the seat of Cook in the Sutherland Shire in New South Wales?
Very strong. Even though people might be a bit annoyed that there's a by-election. There was a state by-election I covered many years ago there, Miranda, where an MP quit and people got annoyed and actually voted Labor. But I can't see that with Cook. It contains a state seat of Cronulla as well. He's talking about global jobs, which I've speculated on for some time, around the defence space. Good luck to him, I guess. It's pretty harsh on a former PM, I reckon, not getting a pension. He was planning to announce it Australia Day, but after I broke the news today, Peter, he had to come forward with it. But nevertheless, he was planning, as I understand.
Forced his hand.
Yeah, I did actually. But I think it's interesting. It doesn't change that by-election dynamic because I've only pushed it forward Sky's only pushed it forward by a couple of days.
Absolutely. All right, thank you, Andrew. Great to have you back on deck. All right, Paul Murray too will be speaking with former Prime Minister Scott Morrison tonight on his show. If you want more Scott Morrison, tune in to Paul Murray. All right, let's go to some other issues. I know we've talked about Australia Day a lot, but it's really gone under my skin. I'm passionate about it. I know you are too. I read all the feedback you send me in. And so too is my next guest, a Vietnam veteran, war veteran, Military Cross recipient, someone who's proudly served Australia and celebrates our national holiday every year without fail. That's why when Michael von Berg saw that the Waverley Council in Sydney's eastern suburbs planned to hold a dawn service featuring a welcome to country, a smoking ceremony and traditional dancing to quote, and I read this out from the council, commemorate our First Nations community, well, he took to social media and urged them to reconsider. The Mayor of the Waverley Council defends this morning day dawn service because he says January 26 can be a difficult day for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, many of whom, says the Mayor, are still coming to terms with the result of the Voice to Parliament referendum. Well, I'm pleased to say the Vietnam veteran who loves Australia Day, Michael von Berg, joins me now. Michael, thank you for your time. Many of us love our country, but you've actually put your life on the line for it in a time of war. Help us understand your concern about this new dawn service on Australia Day.
Thank you, Peter. Well, the dawn service is sacrosanct to Anzac Day, and it has been for over 100 years. And for Waverley Council to call this a dawn service on Australia Day is, I think, to all veterans and all serving members, I think it's disrespectful and very disappointing.
You've said in the media today that you fought with Aboriginal soldiers back in the 1960s in Vietnam. So how did we get to this situation, do you think, where back then they fought for Australia, they stood side by side with our uniform, wearing our uniform under our flag, but now they're told they've got to hate the flag, they've got to be ashamed of our history. How did we get to here?
Well, I'm a German-born Australian. I'm a very proud Australian. I'm a patriot. And I find it very, very sad where young people, in particular, are being taught to hate this country, a country that's given my family and myself great opportunities. And I think there is a much deeper problem, and that is, if we ever had to fight for this country, how could you fight for this country if you hate it? I mean, when we went to war to fight for this country, to fight for the cause, to fight for our mates around us. And I might add, Peter, just very quickly, I sadly lost an Aboriginal soldier in Vietnam. And for these people just to go out and flog the country and talk it down and basically teaching people to hate this country, I think is just dreadful. It is dreadful, and it must be stopped.
What you say there about who will defend Australia in the future, Michael, if we need it defended, is so absolutely true. And I know that's something that occupies the minds of sensible politicians like the late, great Jim Moll. And I know that Tony Abbott's concerned about should we ever need to pick up arms in the future, who amongst our young people are going to love their country enough to look after it and protect it and defend it as you and others did in the past. What do you think of stores like Woolies and others, though? I mean, you fought under that flag. They're now refusing to sell any merchandise in the store with our flag on it.
Yeah, go woke, go broke. That's what I tell Woolworths. And frankly, again, to disrespect our day, our national day, to disrespect our flag, which we've all fought under, and also, I might add, we bury our dead under the flag as well. Again, I just find it terribly disappointing. And mind you, when you look at the shareholdings of some of these corporates, there's no wonder that they have no national pride.
I want to get your thoughts on this one quickly. Cricket Australia effectively banning the words Australia Day during the Gabba test on Friday. But that's not how the CEO sees it. Have a listen.
We want everyone to come along and have the most fantastic time to celebrate Australia Day. But
you won't mention Australia Day.
We're seeking to be as inclusive and welcoming as possible.
All right, well, I don't know how you're including the majority of Australians who want to celebrate the National Day.
So we are not precluding anybody celebrating Australia Day. We're not boycotting Australia Day. We're playing Test cricket on Australia Day.
I understand that you're just not mentioning it either, right?
We encourage people to come to the cricket and celebrate on Australia Day.
That was a train wreck of an interview, Michael. It was made worse then by the Australian captain, Pat Cummins, who had this to say.
I absolutely love Australia. I think it's the best country in the world by a mile, and I think we should have an Australia Day, but I think we can probably find a more appropriate day to celebrate it. I think it is hard because these, something like Jan 26, it does mean something different to different people. I think we're all in unison. We absolutely love Australia and feel really lucky and privileged to be here in this country, but it is a delicate one, and it's going to be a tough day for some.
Michael, what would you say to that?
I wish they'd stick to cricket, to be honest. I mean, those sort of comments are not endearing themselves to a lot of people who enjoy watching their cricket. And, I think so many people that I know, we're basically fed up with being told what to do, what not to do, what to drive, what not to drive. And this virtue signalling by the corporates, the sporting world, and also from sporting men and women, it just has to stop. I mean, it's not proving anything at all. And frankly, it's annoying us.
Michael von Berg, you are in terrific form tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I can hear the audience of Credlin out there cheering you on. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. All right, let's go to a break. After the break, the very little supermarket chain taking on a big fight, though, with Woolies over their scrapping of Australia Day. Listen to the bloke coming up. You're going to absolutely love him. Plus, another worrying development with our defence contracts. The Shadow Home Affairs Minister, James Paterson, coming up. Welcome back. Still to come, more shocking revelations of Hong Kong ties to major Australian defence contracts. But first, the head of Drake's Supermarkets has weighed in on the Australia Day debate and slammed rival Woolworths, or Wokeworths as he calls them, for scrapping Australia Day merchandise. In a scathing social media post, director John Paul Drake has accused Woolies of taking away customers' choices to celebrate their National Day. He says his responsibility as a retailer is to provide customers with the ability to choose the products they want. Drake's supermarket director, John Paul Drake, joins me now. Well, John Paul, you really kicked off something this week. You went out there saying how proud you were, your company is, Drake Supermarkets, to sell Australia Day products. You've got them on your shelves. What are you hearing from customers?
Peter, customers are absolutely loving the fact that they can buy merchandise, Australia Day merchandise, in our stores, and they've been eating it up. And it's fair to say we're probably actually going to sell out of Australia Day merchandise because of the customers coming in, and we've got a fair few of the Wokeworths customers coming in as well, coming to get their merchandise. So it's been fantastic for us. More importantly, it goes to show our true values, and our values of actually letting our customers make the decision on what they want to buy. Like I said in that post, I don't care who you are, whether you're black, green, orange or yellow. If you want to celebrate Australia Day, you should be able to do that. And as a retailer, we want to give our customers the ability to have that choice. I mean, just because you're lactose intolerant doesn't mean I can't have dairy products in the supermarket, can it? So after speaking to our customers...
No, you're spot on. I was just going to say, I mean, I was in supermarkets, not Woolies, I might add, but I was in Coles. Whole lot of stuff there for Chinese New Year. Now, I'm not buying anything for Chinese New Year, but I'm very happy that Coles sells stuff for Chinese New Year. Again, you don't have to buy the Australia Day merchandise, but if I want to buy it, who are Woolies to tell me they're going to ban a choice like that from someone about their own National Day?
Well, they just have. And, this is the problem we face within this country about the duopoly having so much power. It's really about choice. And for us, it's up to us as a retailer to be able to provide the products, whether the days are important to some people or not. Obviously, Australia Day hits a bit of a nerve with the majority of Australians. And where does it stop? Does Easter no longer important? Is Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day? At what stage does the retailer sit there and make that decision saying that's not important enough? And for me, as a very proud Australian, we want to make sure that we are celebrating Australia Day, whichever day it is, but we want to have a day that people aren't embarrassed to celebrate Australia Day. And the merchandise was just the tip of the iceberg, as it turned out to be.
Wow. I read today that Pet Stock, this is a pet company, chain of stores, also owned, I might add though, by Woolies. They've told their staff that they're banned from dressing up on Friday on Australia Day. How do your staff feel about your stand to support Australia Day, John Paul?
We like getting behind our big days, whether it's Christmas or Easter, and I hope to see people with tattoos, maybe not real ones on their faces, but tattoos just showing that they're in the spirit of Australia Day. The stores have dressed up. There's flags. There's bunting all over the place. And we're a very proud Australian company, and we want to make sure that our team understands that. And also our customers come in because they want a bit of theatre at the same time. So we encourage our team members to really get behind Australia Day if they're unlucky enough to be actually working on Australia Day too.
Hey, I've got to ask you, you're at the front line of the cost of living crisis. Before we go, I mean, give me a sense how it's impacting customers in the retail.
There's no doubt the cost of living pressures are hitting everyone, and what we're seeing coming ahead, I mean, our business alone, electricity has almost doubled moving forward. Rates have all gone up, wages have all gone up. So there is a bit of doom and gloom, but we purchase all of our produce off the market floor at market rates. So we try to give that back to the consumer. We don't have direct to plate deals, so we're not screwing that farmer down and getting the best possible price. So we are just trying our best off the market floor to get the best possible price for our customers. And we're not seeing a whole lot of decrease in prices coming through from our major suppliers, all the big players. Ever since COVID, a huge amount of increases have gone through the business. And I can tell you, they're not sitting there pulling those back. So for us, it's about giving what we can back to our consumers. And like everyone out there, we're all noticing it. It's been extremely tough over the last few years, and I don't see it getting much better moving forward. So there is some very tough times ahead, and we are trying our best to get the pricing down, but we are all facing headwinds at the same time.
Well, I think you've won a lot of friends and customers out of your stand on Australia Day. I'm only disappointed that you're not open in Victoria, but that might happen. John Paul, thank you for your time. Drake's supermarkets there, Queensland and South Australia. Now to yet another worrying development in defence contracts in Australia. You'll recall last year concerns over Chinese-made cameras, CCTV, in a number of our government buildings, and also that fallout from Chinese-made drones found in use right across the government. Well, today we've learned that some of our most sensitive defence bases are being guarded by contractors with ties back to Hong Kong-based businessmen, which, as we know, are bound by laws mandating cooperation with the Communist Party machine in Beijing. Now, the company in question, Wilson Security, currently provides security to military bases in Perth, including where we'll soon base nuclear submarines, defence assets in Darwin, even the Defence Department's own Canberra headquarters. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson. Well, Senator Paterson, I'm not alleging any wrongdoing here by Wilson Security, but on the basis of their links to Hong Kong, we're right to be concerned, aren't we?
Peter, 5 or 10 years ago, when Hong Kong was a relatively free and independent jurisdiction before the national security law was passed, it might not have been an issue to have a company headquartered in Hong Kong operating a contract like this on sensitive defence sites. But Hong Kong now is no different from China. The laws operate there in almost exactly the same way they do in China, and the Chinese Communist Party is strengthening its grip. And that means that every business that's based there is effectively dependent on the whims of the Chinese Communist Party and has to follow their orders. And that does increase this risk. So as you say, if the Defence Department and the Albanese government got the drones wrong, got the CCTV cameras wrong, got the solar panels wrong, got the social media applications wrong, I'm not confident, but left to their own devices, they would get this right. So I want to make sure that security is front and centre of this upcoming tender to make sure that Wilson's is held to a very high standard and then our bases are secure.
What about this announcement today by the government of the Medibank hacker? The hack, of course, 2022. We know he is a Russian hacker. The government have slapped him with sanctions. Sure, that's perhaps a good thing. But Richard Marles made a whole lot out of this announcement today. But the experts that I listened to not long after his interview said, look, good and well he's been named, but these sanctions are not going to make much difference. How do we counter this in the future?
It's certainly better than nothing, Peter, but it should have been done some time ago. In fact, I've been calling for them to do exactly this since November 2022, and a whole raft of agencies, including the AFP, DFAT and the Australian Signals Directorate, have provided the necessary advice for this months and months ago. It's not clear what's taking so long. But you're right, in isolation, this is not going to solve the problem. What would have been better if we were networked with our allies, where the United States, Canada, the European Union, UK and others joined us in these sanctions. So this person wasn't just prevented from coming to our country and putting his assets in our banks, but he couldn't travel anywhere in the world. And when the world starts to get a lot smaller for you and a lot less friendly, that might lead you to think twice about engaging in this activity. The other thing we need to be doing more of is offensive cyber operations against these hackers. The ASD has the people and the technology that they're capable of doing it. They just need to be let off the leash to do much more of it, because that will really make people think twice.
Hey, just quickly, you're a senator for Victoria. I know this is outside your portfolio brief, but these worrying crime statistics today out of Victoria, particularly in relation to youth crime recidivism, so that's young people committing crimes again and again and again. The stats out today say that where a child is aged between 10 and 13 and they're charged with one criminal offence by police, there's 40% of those kids in that number that will go back before the courts, racking up 10 plus additional charges. We also know that the 16-year-old charged with the alleged murder of a Doncaster doctor, this is a doctor who was killed during a home invasion just recently. Well, that kid was out on bail despite being charged with an aggravated burglary involving a machete. Now, this can't continue. What needs to happen here in Victoria?
Peter, these are very disturbing statistics, and as you point out, there are heartbreaking stories which illustrate the reality of it, like a 33-year-old GP being allegedly murdered in his own home while resisting an invasion of his home by two young boys. The youth justice system in Victoria is an absolute disaster. It is not keeping violent criminals off the streets, and it's not successfully rehabilitating people so they can be re-released into the community. And it is a shocking failure of the state Labor government over so many, many years. One thing that's very clear is that violent offenders, even when they are young, cannot be safely released into the community if they are at risk of reoffending like this. And it is not worth risking the life of other people in the community to let them have their freedom while they're waiting charges. They should be held in remand until they can be charged and convicted or found not guilty and then released into the community.
Spot on. A 16-year-old with a machete doesn't get a break as a kid. Thanks for your time, Senator Paterson. All right, after the break, a push on today for rape victims that could risk convicting accused perpetrators who are in fact innocent. We'll go through that. And the New Hampshire primary underway. Trump's looking more and more likely he'll clinch the Republican nomination. So what's the latest for Biden? Because he's certainly looking pretty shaky after the break. Welcome back. Well, the Albanese government have today launched a year-long inquiry into the justice system's response to sexual violence, with a stated aim of making the system less likely to re-traumatise victims. Now, obviously, this is a sensitive area, but no matter how emotive it is, the basic principles of justice can't simply be put aside. The inquiry will be looking at alternatives to criminal trials, which could include civil trials, which we know, of course, have a lower burden of proof, and even compensation schemes. Joining me now to discuss the potential ramifications of this, Legal Affairs contributor at The Australian, Chris Merritt. Chris, I guess my big concern is here, if we were to move away from the criminal trial where the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt, we'll end up with a burden of proof that's less, and that's a concern.
It's a catastrophe. If that's what comes out of this inquiry, it would mean watering down the significance of convictions for rape. And in my view, sexual assault is one of the most serious offences and should be treated as such, and that's why we have a criminal justice system. It's wrong on another level too. If we are to shift to civil trials for rape, that means there could be cost implications for the complainants. So if you lose, if you're a complainant and you lose, you could be confronted with a damages bill, a costs bill to pay for the other side. It's moving away from the fundamental principle that the criminal justice system is there to apply to everybody equally, and unless you commit a crime, you shouldn't be penalised for your conduct. If we're going to move away from that and start applying civil justice, civil standards, it's very worrying.
I guess the other thing that worries me in all of this too, and we saw this come out very clearly in the Sofronoff inquiry into the Higgins-Lerman case, innocent until proven guilty. There was a sense, and Sofronoff really drew this out in his inquiry, that there was already a presumption to defer to Higgins as a rape victim before any evidence was heard, and it was prejudging the outcome of what should be our justice system, you know, evaluating the truth, listening to the evidence and coming up with a decision. Now, that's also a concern, surely.
There's actually a very good part of the terms of reference for this inquiry. And for the first time that I'm aware of, the Law Reform Commission will actually be required to have a look at the decision-making and accountability of prosecutors, the directors of public prosecutions. You'll remember that was a very prominent feature of the Sofronoff inquiry. But it's not the only matter. We recently had in New South Wales a very respected judge of the District Court, Robert Newlands, be very strong in his criticism of the New South Wales DPP for bowling up a series or a particular case that should never have been brought. He described it as a miscarriage of justice, an unjust act. And that's the role of the prosecutors is critical to the justice system, the criminal justice system. And at the moment, prosecutors who run cases simply to get it off their desk, there's no way of holding them to account. And this can be potentially ruinous if courts subsequently find that the person facing charges, that there's no case against them. And that's what's happened on a number of occasions in New South Wales. Newlands was not the only judge. Penny Wass, another district court judge, has also been severely critical about this. So it's good that the role of prosecutors is at last going to be examined.
Well, I'll rely on you to watch it closely, as you always do. Chris Merritt, thank you. All right, let's go to my panel for tonight. Sky News contributor Kosha Garner, former Labor MP Michael Danby. Well, it's all about the White House race at the moment. New Hampshire's underway. We saw that rout there for the former president, or currently president, we call him, don't we, Donald Trump, in Iowa. What can we expect in New Hampshire? We're down to 2. Haley's not in the running, but is she running for something else, do you think?
Maybe. Trump has officially, well, nothing's ever official with him, but he has ruled her out as vice president, and his supporters really, really dislike her, so it wouldn't make sense for him to pick her, but maybe he sees something we don't. I think you're right, this is a formality, cosmetic almost, until the inevitable, just given his showing in Iowa and the polling and all the rest of it. Maybe she wants to see it through to South Carolina, which comes next, and that's her home state. She's polling a little bit tighter to Trump, so maybe off the back of that momentum, there's something that comes with it, but I think this is all just cosmetics.
Is this about her setting herself up, though? If Trump was to run this time, does she set herself up for the next potential election?
I think that's always a possibility, but as they say, a week is a lifetime in politics. 4 years from now, where is she, where's Ron DeSantis, who else is on the scene? I really think this was kind of her one-shot moment. She is sort of propped up or supported by the donor class and a lot of other people like her, so this was her time, but I would think that she'd probably be obsolete in 2028, but who knows? All
right, Michael, assume we've got Trump. Do we have Biden as well?
A lot of other people like her, a lot of people who are immigrants and people who are great people like Nikki Haley. So I wouldn't disparage her. But we've got Trump, and if it's a Biden-Trump contest, as Nikki Haley says, 70% of Americans don't want that. 70%. And if the Democrats allow that to happen, they're giving Trump a victory. Trump will win in a Biden-Trump contest. And I just think that that's crazy. You know, there must be a way of...
Who do you think it could be?
Maybe the governor of California, but you know, they're leaving it so late that some of the wiser old people in the Democratic Party, James Carville and Axelrod, are begging Biden to step down. I think the problem is the next year will be so serious in international affairs. We have a person whose acuity is not able to deal with the situation.
Yeah, I think that's the real worry. Who do you think it could be?
Gavin Newsom's name gets floated. Michelle Obama is kind of the wild card. She keeps coming back, and she would never do it, I think, through the muddy process, but there is a little provision at the convention that you can parachute somebody in, and they don't have to go through the mudslinging of a primary process, and there are some who theorize that that's deliberate, why he's leaving it so late, but who knows? I think these are all fantastical scenarios. Most likely it's going to be Biden.
Hey, what about this court case you drew my attention to? This could be a game changer for Trump.
Yes, it angered a lot of people on the Republican side, including elected officials and others. So this was a dispute between the federal government and the state of Texas. You've been covering regularly the illegal immigration pouring through the border, 8 million people under Biden. The state of Texas, the governor started erecting a barrier, barbed wire, basically saying, if you won't do it, we will. And then the federal government sued and presented an emergency case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sided with the Biden administration on the basis of jurisdiction and who owns that land where that barrier was erected. But politically, even if legally that's sound, maybe, politically, everybody can see what's happening with the border. It's a number 2 issue right now. Even Democrats have had enough of it, and there's a lot of momentum, I think, from this issue that comes in, which basically is suggesting the only person who can stem this is somebody in the executive branch who is tough on immigration, and that's what Trump is positioning.
Plays into him perfectly. Yeah. Hey, I've got to ask you comments made by Tony Abbott today in the media to say we are not doing enough for Ukraine. We've let them down. We know we're going to bury these Taipan helicopters in the ground. I know you and I talked about this outside the studio last week. I mean, I think it's just horrific. They asked for more Bushmasters. We didn't give them to them. We've got them sitting in garages in Queensland. But also they asked for coal, for God's sake, back in December, and we haven't even had the courtesy, Michael, at a federal government level, given your old party hates coal, to even respond to the request. What's going on?
Well, General Mick Ryan, who is a Liberal Australian military figure, says that there are 20 Taipans left. Now, I used to know Richard Marles well, and I appeal to him, Richard, you're a humanitarian. The Ukrainians are having mass casualties caused by the lack of ammunition. They need these helicopters for Medibank. Yep. For God's sake, drop the pride of the Australian government, and you're the minister, you're the deputy prime minister. Tell the CDF and the Defence Department, I'm in charge. Send the bloody helicopters to the Ukrainians. They really need them.
And the coal too. How about?
And the coal. I mean, do we want the Ukrainians to freeze during the with all of their electricity knocked out by, Mr. Putin?
It's crazy.
Sure, we could afford some coal. Send a few ships, Richard.
Hey, just quickly, Hamas, there's been this debate about the money, and we talked about it last week. Penny Wong's given another 20-odd million, bringing it up to $46 million to the Palestinian cause. She says it's for humanitarian, then she has to appeal after she's given the money. Don't you dare use it for terrorism. But you've done a bit of research about where the Hamas money is.
Yeah, and it's really opaque. It's very difficult with any of these terrorist organizations, of course, to source and follow the money. Cryptocurrency is one. I think there were sanctions. This place Australia joined, the US and the UK. It's low-hanging fruit to sanction cryptocurrency funding Hamas, so they did that. I think it's about 40 to 45 million is what analysts say that they acquired through crypto in 3 years, so it's not that much. A lot of it is through this cat and mouse game that NGOs and charitable organizations run, where there's a cover of something else, but they're sympathetic to Hamas, and then the funding goes back, and certain countries maybe aren't as astute at figuring that out and penalizing them or criminalizing it. And then there's state actors, Iran, as we know, and the plane loads of cash that the US sent to Iran.
6 billion.
Yeah, that comes up. And Qatar is another one that there seems to be a lot of friendly people and leaders of Hamas that live in Qatar, and Qataris funding it. And that's a whole other can of worms because they are quite cozy as a lobbying group in a lot of Western governments right now. So there's a lot of questions, I think, that need to be asked about that.
A lot of luxury living at the Four Seasons Hotel in Doha.
Yeah.
And a lot of the worst are already out of the country, aren't they? Yeah. All right, Michael Danby, Koshigata, great to have your company. All right, we'll come back to that issue next week. We'll do a bit of a deep dive into what's happening in the Middle East. All right, that's it for me. Up next, Andrew Bolt.